On the night of January the 30th last, at approximately 11:30 p.m, a wealthy businessman and well-known Fulchester personality, Malcolm Winfield, was walking home across Carlton Park in the company of a young man when they were set upon by a man and a woman. Winfield was assaulted and robbed of a crocodile skin wallet containing £48, but Ronald Hamilton, the young man with him, escaped unharmed. Winfield eventually staggered from the park, where a passing pedestrian spotted him and telephoned for an ambulance. He was subsequently taken to Fulchester Hospital, where he was interviewed by the police. The prosecution case is that Ronald Hamilton met Winfield in a local club and lured him into the park to be subjected to a vicious assault and robbery by his attackers, Derek Clark and Sharon Cox.
Mr. Winfield, as I expect you know, I represent Mr. Hamilton. Tell me, when you entered the club Tammy's on the night of the robbery, was Mr. Hamilton already there, or did he arrive later?
He was already there.
And how long had he been there?
I didn't ask him.
Well, had he arranged to meet you that night?
No, he hadn't.
So your meeting was a complete accident?
Not necessarily. I'm a regular Wednesday visitor. He knew I'd be there.
That's merely your supposition, Mr. Winfield. The fact is, it was you who approached Mr. Hamilton, isn't it?
Not at all.
No?
No, we just fell into conversation.
Would you explain?
When I arrived at the club, he was sitting at the bar. As I'd met him on previous occasions, I wished him good evening. Quite normal, isn't it?
Quite, Mr. Winfield. And because he was looking, as you said earlier, somewhat depressed and a bit nervy, you bought him a drink, is that right?
It is.
Well, you didn't have to, did you?
No, it was merely a gesture. He looked edgy.
Was he talking to anybody?
No one.
Or did he look as if he was in the mood for talking?
Well, he talked to me, didn't he?
What did you buy him, Mr. Winfield?
Oh, dear. A Scotch and dry, I think.
Single or double?
Does it matter?
You must answer the question, Mr. Winfield.
Well,
It was a double, wasn't it?
very likely. I'm relatively well off. I don't notice that sort of thing.
Did he ask for a double?
Oh, look here. He asked for a drink and I bought him a double. It's not that...
And was he very talkative and eager to get into conversation?
I think he was glad of the opportunity, yes.
Because of his preoccupations?
He didn't mention them at the time. I know why now.
At any time that night, did Mr. Hamilton buy you a drink?
Probably not.
Yes or no?
As I say, I wouldn't have thought so.
Well, that's rather unusual, isn't it?
He was broke. He was out of work. He'd asked me several times if I could find him a job.
And you thought you could help him?
I said there was a possibility of using him in my firm.
The travel agency?
Yes.
Well, he couldn't have been very keen on the idea, could he?
On the contrary, he was desperate.
Not desperate enough to consider it worthwhile oiling you with drinks.
He had no money.
He'd paid to get in, so he must have had some.
Tell me, Mr. Winfield, is this club for members only?
Oh, yes, my lord. There's a standard entrance plus a temporary membership fee of 55 pence. For that, you get your entrance and a light snack. Nothing special. Chicken in the basket, that sort of thing.
What about the hours?
Well, it opens at 10 in the evening and goes on until 2:30 in the morning. Very convenient, given the present licensing laws.
Provided you're not driving, Mr. Winfield.
I always take a taxi, my lord.
Very wise.
Did you talk about employment possibilities that night?
Briefly?
Briefly?
Yes, well, business was tricky at the time.
Yes, it must have been.
Yes, we had the rise in the fuel prices, and then we had the 3-day week.
The 3-day week?
Yes, I think I was more insecure than he was.
Really? Hamilton didn't want to talk to you that night.
Pardon?
Hamilton didn't want to talk to you that night.
Oh, rubbish.
It was you who was feeling solitary and lonely and in need of companionship. You foisted yourself on Mr. Hamilton, despite the fact that you could see that he wanted to be left alone, didn't you?
I bought the boy a drink, that's all. That's not a crime, is it?
Not at all, Mr. Winfield. Now, whose idea was the game of chess?
Well, it could have been mine, it could have been his.
But it was yours, wasn't it?
Well, I suppose so.
Mr. Winfield, you've been in the witness box for half an hour telling us how you were lured into Carlton Park by Ronald Hamilton, and now it seems that this was not the case at all.
I was manoeuvred into that trap by Ronald Hamilton.
Imperceptibly, it seems.
He was very clever, yes.
Who suggested that you should go to your flat rather than to his place?
I did. It's only logical. My place is nearer than his. The point is, I wanted to take a taxi. It was he who suggested walking across the park.
Did you mention your preference at the time?
As I said, I didn't think the exercise would do me any harm.
You'd agree, then, that you didn't take much persuading. Had he been to your flat before?
He had.
When?
Round about Christmas time.
And what was that for?
A drink, a game of chess.
A drink. A game of chess. That all?
Miss Bailey, if you are saying there were other reasons, I'd be grateful if you would be a little more explicit.
In due course, my lord. At Fulchester Hospital, how many times were you interviewed by the police?
Twice.
And why was that?
They wished to verify certain matters.
Was there some discrepancy in the story that they might have discovered elsewhere?
I'd been brutally assaulted. I was in a state of shock. My face was swollen, my ribs were bruised.
I'm sure the court has every sympathy with what you've suffered, Mr. Winfield. But what was the discrepancy between what you first told them and what you told them afterwards?
Well, it seems impossible to credit now. I don't know how I could have forgotten, really, but...
But what?
Well, you see, I don't think he asked me specifically, and I was under the impression that I'd already told him.
Mr. Winfield, this is not a parlour game. Told who what?
I think, my lord, I omitted to tell the police that I was with Ronald Hamilton.
Are you saying that you'd forgotten Mr. Hamilton entirely?
I was concussed. I must have blacked out.
Mr. Hamilton was there in the park with you?
Yes, he was.
You've no doubt about that?
None at all. I was attacked and he ran off.
But you tell us that you saw him escape scot-free, no one making any attempt to catch him, and you would tell us that you were immediately suspicious.
I was.
Well, then why in heaven's name, if you recall everything else about the attack, should you choose to omit the fact that Mr. Hamilton was with you in the park?
I did not choose to omit. I forgot.
Or was it that you were terrified that the police would discover the real reason you were with Mr. Hamilton?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Then I'll tell you, Mr. Winfield. You were using Mr. Hamilton as a homosexual prostitute. And it was for this reason that you had persuaded him to leave the club with you, and not vice versa.
Quite dark in Carlton Park that night, was it?
There was no light at all. I presume it was part of the great switch-off campaign.
Yes, and it's right, isn't it, that you're short-sighted, Mr. Winfield?
Yes, I am.
Yes. And as you tell us, your spectacles were knocked off from the attack by the two attackers whose faces were covered with nylon stockings.
It might save valuable time, my lord, if I reiterate for my learned friend's benefit that I accept that this witness's identification of Derek Clark and Sharon Cox must be regarded with great caution.
Mr. Parsons, does that satisfy you?
I'm much obliged to my learned friend, my lord, but I do find it disturbing that Mr. Winfield, in his evidence to the prosecution, can state with such vehemence, in spite of there having been no identification parade, that he was attacked, and I quote, by those two creatures over there. Now, you must surely allow me room to refute that assertion.
I was under the impression that I had done that before lunch, Mr. Parsons.
Your Lordship pleases. So you can offer us no visual evidence to link these two attackers with Mr. Clark and Miss Cox?
I know it was a man and a girl. And she was wearing a gold crucifix.
Ah, yes. Apart from a solitary gold crucifix. No more questions, my lord.
With your permission, my lord, I'd like to re-examine, to elaborate a point which arose from your lordship's own question to this witness.
Oh, indeed. Well, go on, Mr. O'Connor.
Mr. Winfield, you told his lordship that you invariably take a taxi home from the club.
Yes.
Yet on this occasion you set out to walk home across the park.
Yes.
Would you tell the court why you broke a long-standing habit that night?
Ronald Hamilton suggested it.
Ronald Hamilton suggested it. Thank you, Mr. Winfield. Does your lordship have any further questions?
No, thank you.
And I call Mrs. Elspeth Riley. Elspeth Riley, please.
What is your religion?
I am a Roman Catholic, sir.
Take the Bible in your right hand and read aloud the words on the card.
Would you like me to...
If you please.
Oh, my glove. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Elspeth Bernadette Riley.
I am, sir.
Where do you live, Mrs. Riley?
44 Chadwick Road, Fulchester, sir.
Number 44. Do you know number 46, Chadwick Road?
Oh, yes, I do. It's where they used to live, those two.
There is a distinction between 46 and 46A, is there not?
Oh, yes. Yes, 46 is a shop. It's a grocer's shop.
And 46A?
That is a flat adjoining it, facing to the rear. Well, you see, between my house and 46R, there is a public pathway leading to Carlton Park.
How far away is the park, Mrs. Riley?
Oh, only about 3 or 4 minutes' walk, my lord.
And is there a hedge between your house and the passageway?
No, there's a wall, my lord. Yes, it's by the side of my garden.
A brick wall?
Yes, that's right, sir.
And how wide is this passageway?
Oh, sure, it's just like a little boreen. There's nothing at all. I mean, you couldn't walk two together up it.
Oh, you mean about 3 or 4 feet wide, would that be?
Yes, I suppose you could say that, yes.
Thank you.
And where exactly is 46A situated?
Ah, well, now, that's nothing but a window and a door. You know, facing onto the passageway. It's just one up and one down. It used to be connected with the shop until they converted it and let it out to those two.
Which are they?
Mr. Clark and Miss Cox.
I see.
No, but all sorts were living there. Always had visitors. Single people. Well, I say single, but they came in pairs, most of them. Unmarried, of course, like them two. I was just like one of those sort of communes. I mean, everybody was living there. I mean, there was that man, Mr. Hamilton. Well, he was there for over 6 months.
Do you know when he left?
Yes, it was just before Christmas.
Now, that would be about a month before Mr. Winfield was attacked. Did Mr. Hamilton ever return?
Very seldom. I don't think he got along with them.
Why'd you say that, Mrs.
Well, they
Riley?
weren't his type, were they? I mean, they were noisy, they were playing their records and laughing and shouting. He was a sort of timid kind.
And do you recall the last time you saw Ronald Hamilton at 46A?
Yes, I do. It was January the 29th.
And that would be the night before the robbery.
Yes, I was going out to have a quick half. It was about 10 o'clock. The Duke of Lancashire is directly opposite me. And I saw him coming out of their flat.
Did you speak to him?
No, I didn't. No, he just came out and he came past me just as I was crossing the road.
I see. Now, can we turn to the night of January the 30th last? What do you remember of that, Mrs. Riley?
Oh, that was an altogether strange night, sir. It was noise and silence. Noise, silence. They had the record player on, you see, as per usual. But latest, but about 10:30, I noticed it had stopped. Well, I thought, well, they've gone across, to have a quick one. I hadn't noticed them go, but I thought, well, they must have done, because the records were off. Well, it was latish, and I was doing a little bit of sewing, and I must have dropped off. Because when I woke up again, my clock was striking.
What time was that, Mrs. Riley?
11:45. It strikes every quarter on the quarter.
Go on, please.
Oh, well, now I thought I'll go to bed now. Mercifully, there's no noise coming from 46R. And then I heard my cat out in the garden. He was asking to come in, so I went outside.
And what happened then?
Well, I picked up my cat, ready to take him in, when I heard two people running down the passageway. And they came down the passage and they stopped outside the front door of number 46R, in the passageway, you see. So I looked over the wall just to see what all the fuss was about. And there I saw Clark, trying to find his keys. Well, I thought it must be that, because, at any road, there he was fumbling about in his pocket. Only they were both puffed, the two of them. Yes, and she kept on saying, come on, get a move on, hurry up. And he said, well, I won't repeat what he said.
Mrs. Riley.
Language.
Mrs. Riley, if you'll just tell us what you heard him say, omitting the oath if you wish.
I am no Puritan, my lord, but I have been brought up.
Yes, Mrs. Riley, he swore, and then what did you hear?
He said, effort. I must have left the effing things in the house again. And she said, well, as long as you didn't drop them in the park. Now, come along in, because we've got what we wanted, and I'm dying for a smoke.
What did you take that to mean, Mrs. Riley?
Well, I took it to mean that he had dropped his keys in the park, because soon after that I heard them just crawling in through the downstairs window.
What did you do then?
Well, I didn't have any actual evidence then, did I? That they had the drugs on them.
Drugs, Mrs. Riley? I thought we were trying a case of robbery.
Oh, but what I heard, I took it to mean that they'd been buying that marijuana in the park, and they were coming back to smoke it.
My lord, this is, of course, sheer speculation.
Yes, but what are we to do about it?
My lord, Mrs. Riley's suspicions, however erroneous, did lead her to take further action again that night. And that is the significance of them.
Very well, Mr. O'Connor, let's get on. And Mrs. Riley, will you please just answer the question and don't go volunteering information?
No, very well. I'm sorry, my lord.
So, Clark and Cox entered the house through the window. And what did you do then?
Well, I went inside too. And I was just thinking to myself, should I or shouldn't I? Run up the road and call the police. When they came back out again.
Where were you at this time?
Oh, I was in my bedroom, upstairs. See, my window looks out over the passageway so I could see them. Came out the front door with their dog. Well, it's only 3 minutes or so since they'd gone back in. And I thought, well, now I'll forget the whole thing and go to bed where there's still a bit of peace and quiet. And I did. And I dropped off. And the next thing I knew, there was the most almighty row coming from that record player. My God, there were drums, and he was going bang, 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 bang. And
what time was that, Mrs. Riley? What time was that, Mrs. Riley?
It was after 1 o'clock, sir, and that did it. I put on my clothes, and I went up the road, and I called the police.
Thank you, Mrs. Riley. Will you wait there, please?
Mrs. Riley, I'm a little confused by your evidence. It's doubtless my fault. But am I to understand correctly that you heard these two people running down the passageway, and when they discovered they'd mislaid their front door keys, they climbed in the downstairs window?
Yes.
And from what you heard, you thought that they'd been involved in some sort of shady business involving drugs.
I did, sir. Mm-hmm.
And after being involved in this shady business, they came out their house some 3 minutes later to take their dog for a walk.
I was in my bedroom and I saw him.
Were the defendants smoking on the second occasion which you saw them?
Can't remember that.
I thought you told us that Miss Cox said, let's get inside and have a smoke. They came outside some 3 minutes later and they still weren't smoking.
I thought they were talking about the marijuana.
Yes, you thought they were talking about marijuana, Mrs. Riley, but were they smoking anything?
They might have been.
They might have been.
They were.
Oh, they were. I see. Now, you've told us that on the first occasion you heard them running down the passageway and you looked over the wall to see what was going on. Is that right?
Yes, it is, sir.
Yes. Now, how tall are you, Mrs. Riley?
I don't know. I'm about 5 foot 2.5 or 3 or something. I don't bother about that sort of nonsense these days.
No. But are you aware that the wall in question, Mrs. Riley, is at least 5 feet 6 inches high? Did you know that, Mrs. Riley?
No.
You couldn't have looked over it, could you?
No, but I heard them, you see. And I know what they look like, so what's the difference?
The difference is, Mrs. Riley, that you are here on oath to tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I'm very sorry, my lord. I know. I'm very confused, that's all. It's all this... No use to this questioning. See, that was a slip of the tongue. I heard them, you see, and I must have seen them somehow in my head.
In other words, my lord, a piece of total fabrication.
Yes, Mr. Parsons. Now, members of the jury, what Mrs. Riley said she saw on that first occasion you will ignore because she now says that she did not see anything. I think, on the other hand, you may consider what she now says she heard, which, as I understand it, is a conversation about the keys in the park.
Your lordship's got it wrong, if I may say so.
Oh, no doubt, Mr. Parsons.
The keys themselves were never actually mentioned, my lord.
If I might assist your lordship, the evidence was as long as you didn't drop them in the park. Come on, let's get inside. We've got what we wanted. I'm dying for a smoke.
Yes, I'm obliged to my learned friend, my lord.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. On the other hand, Mr. Parsons, since Mr. Clark and Miss Cox were heard entering their flat through a downstairs window, It does seem to indicate that the conversation might well have been about the keys in the park.
A matter of interpretation, my lord.
Quite, Mr. Parsons.
As with so many other alleged events that evening.
Shall we leave that to the jury? Please continue.
Now, Mrs. Riley, you don't like Derek Clark and Sharon Cox, do you?
Neither would you if I had to live next door to them. There'd be nothing but trouble ever since they moved in there. What with their record player and their dog forever barking. They're not our type, they're different. Last summer, I looked in, and do you know what I saw? I saw them, both of them, naked, prancing about to the music, and they didn't even bother to close the curtains.
So doubtless you were relieved when they were remanded in custody and had to leave the flat.
I was, sir.
Yes. How do you sleep at nights, Mrs. Riley? Not very well, I'll be bound.
Mr. Parsons, do not lead.
I might say so, my lord. It wasn't leading, it was dragging.
Yes, I rephrase the question, my lord. Mrs. Riley, are you a sound sleeper?
With them playing records every night?
Yes, you find it difficult to sleep.
I do. Luckily, my doctor gives me sleeping pills, for what they're worth.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he can't give me really strong ones, can he? Because he's frightened of killing me.
I wish the bugger would.
My lord, I don't know whether you could hear from where you are, but there were some comments from the dock. I didn't catch exactly what they were myself.
Neither did I, Mr. O'Connor, but I'm sure that Mr. Parsons has everything in hand.
Yes, indeed I have, my lord. I'm much obliged. So you have some rather weak sleeping tablets, do you, Mrs. Riley?
Yes, I do, sir.
How effective are they?
Well, they get me off, but I can be woken up, as I was that night with the music. But, I mean, that would waken the dead.
Yes, you weren't sleeping very deeply that night.
Well, no, don't. Let me put it this way. It was the noise. I was woken by the noise. I mean, first of all, I thought I was dreaming.
Oh. You dream a lot?
Sometimes.
So you thought you were dreaming that night?
No, not that way, sir.
Well, how then?
I can't remember.
You can't remember? Of course you can't remember, Mrs. Riley. On January 30th last, you saw Mr. Clark and Miss Cox take their dog for a walk, and that is all. The rest of your evidence is a tissue of half-truths, dreams, and downright prejudice.
The case of the Queen against Clark, Cox and Hamilton will be resumed in the Crown Court tomorrow. When Malcolm Winfield was attacked and robbed of a wallet containing £48 in Carlton Park, Fulchester one night, his companion, Ronald Hamilton, escaped scot-free and unharmed. The prosecution alleged that Hamilton assisted Derek Clark and Sharon Cox in the robbery, and Mrs. Riley, Clark and Cox's neighbour, has testified that she heard the two running from the direction of the park shortly after the attack. As a result of certain suspicions and a barrage of loud music from her neighbour's flat, Mrs. Riley had called the police that night. Detective Inspector McGovern, Fulchester CID, is the next witness.
We arrived at 46A Chadwick Road at 2:30 a.m. The door was opened by a young girl, Miss Jennifer Marsh, a visitor to the house who was living in the downstairs front room.
A young girl? How old was she?
19, my lord.
A young woman, then?
Yes, my lord. I informed her that we were police officers and that we had a warrant to search the premises. Now, at this point, Clark appeared at the top of the stairs and he said, "Who is it, Jenny?" And Marsh I wonder if I might refer to my notes, my lord.
Spade, Mr. Parsons? Very well, then.
Marsh said, "It's the fuzz." Clark then turned and went back into his bedroom. We followed immediately and found Miss Cox in the same room in bed. We searched the room and found a crocodile skin wallet hidden in the lid of their record player.
Is that the wallet? Exhibit 1, my lord.
Yes, it is. I examined the contents and found banknotes to the value of £48.
Did you find any other papers, Inspector?
No, nothing at all, sir. I produced the wallet, and I said to Clark, "Is this your wallet?" He said, "I didn't nick it, if that's what you mean." I said, "So it was nicked, was it?" And he said, "No, it wasn't. We found it while we were taking the dog for a walk. We were going to hand it in tomorrow morning." I asked him where he'd found it. He said he'd found it up a passageway near the park end. I then asked him why he had hidden it in the record player, and he said, "For safety." I said, "Safety from whom?" And he replied, "From nobody, just safety." I wasn't satisfied with his replies. I got in touch with Headquarters Control, who informed me that a wallet answering to the same description had been taken from a Mr. Winfield in Carlton Park that night by a young man and woman. I cautioned them both, told them what I knew. Miss Cox then said, "So you're going to try and pin it on us, are you? Well, you'll have to identify us first." I told them I was arresting them and cautioned them again. They made no reply. We took them to the station. At the station, Mr. Clark said, "I didn't do it, I want a solicitor." And Miss Cox said, "It's a frame-up, who put you onto us anyway?" Both declined to make a statement.
Did you question the young lady, Inspector?
Miss Marsh? Yes, sir. While I was waiting for Control to inform me about the wallet, I spoke to her in the presence of the accused. I asked her if she lived at the house, and she said no, that she'd arrived about midnight when Clark and Cox were out walking the dog. I asked her how she got in. She said through a downstairs window that was open. As a result of information given to Detective Constable Coburn by Mr. Winfield, we visited Ronald Hamilton on the morning of the 31st of January.
Who is we, Inspector?
Oh, that's Detective Constable Coburn and myself.
Yes, now let me get this straight. Am I to understand it that Constable Coburn was not with you when you visited Clark and Cox?
Oh, that is correct, my lord. He was interviewing Mr. Winfield in hospital.
Yes, I see. Thank you.
Hamilton came to the front door in his dressing gown, and I told him we wanted to interview him in regard to an attack on Malcolm Winfield. He took us upstairs to his room, but halfway up, he stopped, he turned to us and he said, "I was with him last night, you know, when he was attacked in the park." We went into his room, and I said, "Which park do you mean?" He replied, "Carlton Park. We were attacked, and I got away." I asked him, "Did you inform anyone of the attack?" And he said, "I was scared. I don't know what came over me. I wanted to get away. I wanted to forget the whole thing." I then asked him if he knew Derek Clark and Sharon Cox, and he groaned and said, "Oh no, what have they been telling you?" I then told him I was arresting him on suspicion of robbing Malcolm Winfield. I cautioned him and he was taken to the station where he made a statement.
Do you now produce that statement?
Yes, I do.
Exhibit 2, my lord. Would you read it, please, Inspector?
It reads, "I was going to Tammy's for a drink at 10 when I met Derek Clark and Sharon Cox in the High Street. Clark told me I owed him £5 rent money. I used to live with him, you see."
I used to live with them, you see, until the end of December when I got out. Clark said they were both broke, and unless I gave him the money, he'd make a right mess of me. I said I didn't have any money, and Clark said, "Well, you'll have to get it for us, won't you?" Clark asked me where I was going, and I told him. Clark then asked me if I was meeting Malcolm Winfield there. I said that I didn't know, but that he was usually there on a Wednesday. Clark then said he'd let me off the debt if I got Winfield into Carlton Park around 11:30. He said they'd be waiting outside Tammy's about then, so not to try anything funny or they'd do me. I didn't want to do it, but I was scared they'd beat me up, so I didn't have any choice. I knew I should have rung the police, but I was in such a panic, nervous and everything, and frightened of Derek Clark. In the end, I did what they asked. I've been a coward, I know. I wish I'd had a bit more guts and I wouldn't be in the mess I'm in now.
The mess that I'm in now.
Mr. Hamilton readily volunteered this statement, did he?
He did, sir.
Thank you, Inspector.
Inspector McGovern, you visited 46A as a result of Mrs. Riley's complaints about noise and the allegations that my clients were in possession of illegal drugs. Is that right?
That's correct, sir, yes.
Now, was there any noise when you got there?
No, sir, none.
No records playing?
None at all.
Did you find any drugs?
No, sir.
None at all?
No.
So the complaints and allegations against my clients were completely without foundation.
Well, as it proved, they were. But of course, that's not to say they weren't playing music when the complaints were made.
Doubtless they'd smoked all their drugs too. So, your finding this wallet, it was a complete accident then?
Oh, very much so.
An accident for which you were offered a perfectly plausible explanation?
I wasn't satisfied, sir.
Well, it was past midnight. The nearest police station was over 3/4 of a mile away. They said they intended to hand in the wallet in the morning. You weren't satisfied?
No, sir.
Well, it's quite a common occurrence, surely, for people to hand in lost property one day, perhaps even 2 or 3 days after they've found it.
Oh, yes, sir, yes.
I trust they've not all immediately been arrested for their pains.
I can't see the point of all this, my lord.
Nor can I, Mr. O'Connor. Mr. Parsons, are you suggesting that Inspector McGovern did not have reasonable grounds for suspicion? If so, why? I'm afraid I can't see where this cross-examination is leading.
Well, shall I tell your lordship?
I wish you would.
Well, if it were not for Mrs. Riley's highly imaginative and vindictive allegations, this whole case could have been cleared up without any suspicion falling on my clients whatsoever. They would have handed in the wallet in the morning. There would have been no contact with the inspector.
But undoubtedly they would have been questioned, Mr. Parsons.
Your lordship will surely allow that it's hardly plausible that a thief would take his swag to the lost property department of the local police station.
But the wallet was never handed in, Mr. Parsons. The jury can decide whether they believe that your client would have handed it in. Keep your comments for your closing speech, and let us stick to the evidence now, shall we?
Very well, my lord. Now, I presume you checked this wallet for fingerprints, did you, Inspector?
We did. Mr. Clark's were on it.
Any others?
There were some, but they were smudged.
They could have belonged to a third or fourth party.
Oh, it's possible. We can't be sure.
No, indeed, Inspector McGovern, the only thing you can be sure about is that the wallet was found in the possession of Mr. Clark and Miss Cox, for which they offered you a perfectly plausible explanation.
Superficially, yes, but you're reckoning without the fact that, according to Mr. Winfield, the wallet was taken by a young man and woman. And even more important, that, apart from banknotes, the wallet contained certain papers which would have immediately identified it with its owner, and these had disappeared.
Well, were they found in 46A?
No, sir.
What about this stocking mask the attackers were allegedly wearing? Were they found in the flat?
No, sir.
Were they found anywhere else?
No, sir.
It's very thin stuff, isn't it, Inspector?
I wonder, Inspector McGovern, could you tell the court what Clark and Cox were wearing on the night that you visited them?
Next to nothing, sir. He had a towel round him. As far as I can judge, he was completely naked. Apart from a gold crucifix, that is.
I call Ronald Hamilton.
What is your religion?
I'm an agnostic.
I see. Just read aloud the words on this card.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Ronald James Hamilton.
Yes.
And you live at 23 Ryle Crescent, Fulchester?
Yes.
Is this a flat you live in?
No, it's a bed sitting room.
And what is your occupation?
I'm unemployed. I was at Fulchester University for a year and a term, and then I dropped out. Couldn't take it.
Why was that?
That was just too much for me. The work, the pressure. Well, I failed some exams in June and I had to take them again at Christmas. It was too much for me.
I see. And how old are you?
I'm 20.
Now, Mr. Winfield has told us that you were an acquaintance of his. How well did you know each other?
Well,
I realize that this is probably very painful for you, Mr. Hamilton, but will you tell the court the nature of your relationship with Mr. Winfield?
I didn't know him very well. We met at Tammy's just before Christmas, and well, I was broke, and he said he might be able to get me a job. Then he invited me back to his place.
And did you go?
Yes. He said it was for a game of chess and a drink, but when we got back there,
yes?
He offered me £25 to sleep with him.
That is a lie. That's a deliberate slander.
Quiet, Mr. Winfield.
Oh, my lord.
Mr. Winfield. Prosecuting counsel will have ample opportunity to challenge that statement if need be.
I will not sit here and have my good name and my business ruined by that dirty little
Mr. Winfield, you
My
will
lord.
either be silent or I shall have you removed from this court. Very well, Miss Bailey.
And did you agree to this proposition?
Yes.
And he gave you £25.
You see, I wanted to move out of Chadwick Road.
Didn't you get on with Mr. Clark and on with